Water, that's what they were looking for. They found it too, but not before they found this. Funny looking back on it. The Corsicana Commercial Club thought the black gooey mess they found at about 1,000 feet was a blame nuisance. Corsicana needed water if it was to grow, not this stuff. So the all was sealed off and the men hired to dig the artesian wells kept on drilling. They hit water about 1,000 feet later. Didn't know what they would do with that other stuff. Thank goodness a couple of Corsicana's citizens decided to do a little investigating, in case this mess might have some commercial value. Turns out H.G. Damon and Ralph Beaton were on the right track. Water might help Corsicana grow, but black gold would put it on the map. This is how it happened.
Pennsylvania was the heart of the oil industry in the late 19th century. It was there that Damon and Beaton sent samples of the oil discovered in Corsicana. When the report came back that the crude had definite commercial value, Damon and Beaton organized the Corsicana Oil Development Company and persuaded noted Pennsylvania oil men John Gailey and James M. Guffey to come to town to check out the petroleum possibilities. Gailey and Guffey drilled 5 wells in Corsicana, 3 of which became modest producers. These 2 men would later move on to bigger challenges. But Corsicana had oil fever. Soon, 85-foot derricks would dot every town lot, backyard, and vegetable patch. Then Mayor James E. Weitzel invited a talented manager for Standard Oil to visit our area. Joseph S. Cullinan liked what he saw, and he stayed. Inviting Cullinan to Corsicana proved to be a shrewd move, as he would effectively take Corsicana to the next successful step in the oil industry. Mr. Cullinan gathered investors, formed J.S. Cullinan Company, and built the first oil refinery in the mid-continent west of the Mississippi River. E.R. Brown, another Standard Oil import, supervised the construction of the facility, and on Christmas Day, 1898, Mr. W.C. Ralston fired the first still. Soon tanker cars were ready for shipment. In true Texas fashion, a banner on one of the tanker cars read, "Corsicana Petroleum Oil, greatest discovery ever made in Texas. Quality as good as Pennsylvania's, quantity unlimited." By 1901, 653 Corsicana wells had produced 3 million barrels of oil. This refinery produced the first ever commercial batch of crude oil in Corsicana, the first in Texas, and the first in the mid-continent west of the Mississippi River. Now Mr. Cullinan would set his efforts toward an aggressive marketing strategy for oil and gas. He successfully modified a Cotton Belt Railway locomotive to use oil fuel instead of coal. Other regional railroads soon followed suit. He promoted the use of oil on dirt streets to prevent dust and mud. Corsicana would be the first city in Texas to develop and use natural gas for illumination. Mr. Cullinan would go on to serve as the founding father of Magnolia Petroleum Company and Mobil Oil in Texas through the company he formed to build and operate the Corsicana refinery. E.R. Brown would become president of Magnolia Petroleum Company and later chairman of Standard Oil Company in New York. And Corsicana would be the birthplace of the Texas oil industry. Significant bragging rights for the city would include the first commercial oil well and the first commercial oil field in Texas, the first commercial oil refinery in the mid-continent west of the Mississippi River, the birth of the oil drilling and tool manufacturing industries in Texas, and the development of the natural gas industry that would eventually become Lone Star Gas. Corsicana would foster many of the pioneers of the oil industry. Joseph S. Cullinan would become the founder of Texaco and the J.S. Cullinan Company, which was the predecessor of Magnolia Petroleum Company and Mobil Oil. James M. Guffey would found Gulf Oil Corporation, and Walter B. Fondren would become co-founder of Humble Oil, or Exxon. All these titans were trained in the oil fields of Corsicana. The American Well and Prospecting Company, a Kansas-based operation that specialized in water wells, had drilled the Corsicana discovery well. Shortly thereafter, they began manufacturing drilling equipment under the trade name Gumbo Buster. American well and prospecting equipment was used in every major oil field in the world over the next several decades. Equally important, farm boys, mechanics, water well drillers, businessmen, and property owners learned oil field skills in Corsicana and became the first generation of Texas oil drillers, roughnecks, tool pushers, and roustabouts. From Corsicana, countless Texans successfully entered the Texas oil industry, destined soon to explode onto the world petroleum scene at Spindletop. Spindletop, on the Texas Gulf Coast, was the gusher that revolutionized the petroleum industry. It blew in, producing 800,000 barrels of oil in the first 9 days. Gailey and Guffey, with their Corsicana ties, laid the foundation of the success at Spindletop. Captain Anthony Lucas and his partner Patillo Higgins sought out the two men for their venture. Gailey arranged for the Hamill brothers, Kurt, Jim, and Al, to go to Beaumont as drillers. The Corsicana brothers spudded in the well with a rotary rig transported from their home city. The operation was difficult. 2 months of 18-hour day shifts exhausted the crew. After a Christmas break, they were back on the job by New Year's Day 1901. At 1,020 feet, a new bit was inserted. As the bit reached 700 feet, the well began spewing mud high up the derrick. Immediately following the mud, 6 tons of 4-inch drill pipe blew out of the hole, knocking down the crown block. The well quieted for a while, and a disheartened crew began shoveling muck off the platform. Suddenly, once again, the well spewed mud and rock with an explosive roar. Oil shot above the derrick. The black plume of oil doubled the height of the derrick, more oil gushing than any Texan had ever seen, more oil gushing than anyone had ever seen. Lucas said to the Hamills, "Now that we got her, boys, how do we close her up?" 10 days later, knowing one spark could send them all to kingdom come, Al Hamill sawed through the iron pipe, screwed a T onto the casing, and his brother Kurt closed the valve. The Lucas discovery of Spindletop broke all oil production records to that time. The Texas oil boom was officially underway. From its Corsicana birth, the Texas oil industry would march from Spindletop through Saratoga, Sour Lake, Batson, Humble, the Red River Uplift, Petroleum, Electra, Burke Burnett, Goose Creek, Baytown, Ranger, Desdemona, Breckenridge, the Mejia Fault, the Powell oil field, Big Lake, Santa Rita No. 1, the Permian Basin, the Panhandle, Van, and ultimately the greatest oil field ever, the Great East Texas oil field. The Powell oil field was just southeast of Corsicana. Yes, lightning would strike the Corsicana area twice. In 1923, the countryside just southeast of Corsicana was basking in the winter sun. Farmlands were yet unplanted, and the air was quiet and calm. A few short months later, the same countryside would be a forest of wooden derricks and tents, a maze of paths, and continuous roars of motors, drills, and shouting throngs. From the Powell field discovery would grow the towns of Powell, Navarro, Mildred, Eureka, Juarez, and rambunctious, rip-roaring Tuckertown. The town itself was a series of wooden buildings with sheet iron or tar paper roofs. There were several grocery stores and cafes, a hotel, a dry goods store, 2 drug stores, a filling station, a garage, a movie theater, a machine shop, a boiler works, a show repair shop, and several other establishments with questionable reputations. Sidewalks, when they existed, were made of wood. 6,000 people, good and bad, rich and poor, humble and proud, lived in tents with dirt floors or ill-built shanties and shacks. Water was scarce and had to be brought into town on tank wagons drawn by teams of horses. The quality of the water was such that signs in public Corsicana restrooms read, "Pull the string and flush the toilet. Tuckertown needs the water." Lawlessness and crime went hand in hand with the rough and overcrowded way of life in Tuckertown. Bootleggers worked out schedules with each other to keep constables busy at the opposite end of town from where they'd sell their white lightning. Gamblers bet on oil wells, production, depth of the mud in the streets, and when old so-and-so would be sober again. A roving jail was designed to accommodate lawbreakers. Deputy Sheriff Harmon Chandler drove Harmon's hoodlum wagon. He could accommodate 8 or 10 before it became necessary to take them to permanent lodgings in Corsicana. When violence became extreme, the Texas Rangers could be called if necessary. Twice, Tuckertown burned to the ground. The last time, businesses chose not to rebuild because production had begun to decline. Tuckertown went the way of many boom towns. The boom was over, and the town ceased to be. Fortunes earned during the oil booms in and around Corsicana continued to play a large role in its social, economic, and civic development. Dirt roads were oiled. 3 railroads served the town. And the interurban railway connected Dallas to Corsicana with 12 daily round trips. The town built a new municipal building, new banks, a grand theater, and residential housing boomed. The community's oil wealth permeated every level of society. Did the try and try again attitude of speculators and producers mold a hardy race of oil pioneers? Or did that hardy race already exist, just waiting to go into action when the boom came? We may never know. What we do know is that men like Gailey, Guffey, Cullinan, Fondren, and E.R. Brown came to Texas and left their mark on the world. Other locals, William J. Mackey, Fred M. Allison, Lloyd and John Wheelock, H.R. and W.C. Strube, Frank McNally, Jim Collins, and C.L. Brown would pioneer Corsicana through new territory. William Mackey, the oil king, was a Corsicana landowner and lawyer. The discovery of oil on his property led him to rise to the top of the legal profession as an expert in oil and petroleum matters. He drafted the original charter for the Texas Company, later called Texaco. Fred Allison, a driller, was instrumental in designing and improving the rotary table for the rotary drilling rig to work with the newly invented bits. A common expression where Fred's rigs were in action was, "If there's oil, Fred Allison will find it." Lloyd Wheelock was a pharmacist turned oil man. Lloyd, his brother John, and Jim Collins helped bring in the first Mahia gusher known as the Dressenberg No. 2. Lloyd would serve Corsicana in many capacities, most notably as mayor. Both John and Lloyd were well-respected businessmen who gave back much to the industry, their hometown, and their state. Jim Collins was a colorful, self-educated bachelor. He would leave a lasting legacy to Corsicana in the form of endowments for college scholarships to Corsicana Public Schools and to the support of James L. Collins Catholic School. A man whose formal education consisted of 5 years of public school before he had to quit and go to work would make it possible for hundreds of Corsicana's young people to earn college degrees. H.R. Strube, W.C. Strube, and Frank McNally would learn skills in their grandfather's business that would serve them well in the oil fields. The Strube and Strube partnership would drill 2 wells on a 2.5-acre lease from Summerfield Roberts. The second would be the bonanza that almost wasn't. The brothers were ready to plug the hole and call it a duster when H.R. noticed the drilling line had hummed off 20 feet in 5 minutes. A short while later, well number 2 had filled up 3 1,000-barrel tanks in 3 hours and overflowed into the road ditches. Brother Frank McNally would be brought down from Oklahoma to be the drilling and production chief for the operation. The Strubes would marry childhood sweethearts and make their homes in Corsicana. They would be largely responsible for Corsicana's modern hospital, a new country club, and swimming pools for Corsicana's parks. In 1902, at age 24, C.L. Brown left a Virginia farm bound for the Texas oil fields. He found work in Beaumont as a pumper. Later, he became an expert oil driller for the Texas Company and Gulf Oil, working in the legendary discovery fields of Spindletop, Sour Lake, Batson, Humboldt, and Goose Creek. His ambition would lead him to Mahia, Texas in 1922, where he established his own company, the Mahia Torpedo Company. No, this was not a war munitions factory. Brown's company did casing pulling and well shooting work in the booming Mahia field. In 1923, C.L. and 14-year-old C.L. Brown Jr. came up to Corsicana for a well shooting job that would free up Strube Hill No. 1 in the Powell Field. The following year, the Brown family made Corsicana their home. 3 generations of C.L. Browns built a prosperous family business, benefiting the town handsomely in the process. As of 2006, Corsicana continues to reap benefits from the Browns in the form of a non-stop Brown family tornado, if not torpedo, dedicated and highly respected mayor, C.L. Buster Brown III. All of these rare men would share their wealth and their lives with the people of Corsicana. Through trials, and in some cases tragedy, they would persevere to make Corsicana's oil history rich. In 1951, 50 years after Spindletop blew in, the Hamill brothers attended a golden anniversary celebration of the event. The oil industry had traveled far from its Corsicana birth. The allies of World War II had floated to victory on a sea of Texas oil. I'm sure the Hamills reflected on the bleak Christmas of 1900, when they were so exhausted and there was no sign of success in sight. The frightening explosion of mud and pipe, mucking the mud from the platform, and then at last, the dawn of a new era for all of Texas, indeed for all the world. The Hamills had reason to be proud. The industry had marched from its Corsicana birth in 1894 through Spindletop in 1901, right down to the discovery of the world's greatest oil field in 1930 on a hardscrabble Russ County farm between Henderson and Overton, the great East Texas oil field. This oil field alone produced 6 billion barrels of oil. The Hamels, the Strubies, the Wheelocks, the Browns, Jim Collins, Frank McNally, William Mackey, and hundreds of others all played their parts in Corsicana's oil-rich history. And we're so glad they did.